but not really thought about much is why those differences exist. What's the selective pressure behind it? Especially for traits that, if you think about natural selection, seem kind of counterintuitive. And so today and tomorrow we're going to be talking about sexual selection, which is selection for these dimorphic characters or traits. We'll kind of break it down into male and female sexual selection. We'll talk a little bit about plant sexual selection. Yes, it still happens in plants too. And then a brief discussion of sexual dimorphism in humans. And so let's think about that sexual dimorphism a little bit more. Here are some examples from your book and some of the pressures that have resulted in some of these differences. So the purple-throated carob, that's the bird there. And there's definitely differences between the male and female individuals. And sometimes especially for birds, I'll look at birds and I'll think that they're different species, but really they're just a male and a female. I do this with insects a lot too, especially the bees. They're quite dimorphic a lot of times. For plants, getting an indication of dimorphism there is actually really difficult usually. It comes down to numbers of flowers or some physiology that you might be able to distinguish, but they're often not as dramatic visually as what you see in the animal world. But in this example here, we have two birds which feed on nectar. The male bird tends to focus on this plant here, and the female bird tends to focus its energy on the plant here, these flowers. And so the shapes of these flowers are slightly different, and so it's thought that there's been selection for these different beak traits so that they can more efficiently feed from their number one source of nectar. For these two weevils, they have very long snouts, but the female is, 3 to 4 times as long as the male snout here. And there's been pressure for the female to have this long snout because it burrows into flower or leaf buds to lay its eggs. So in order to get their eggs down into a safe location, they have this long snout. Here's the example with peacocks, which probably is one that you're most familiar with these huge male feathers compared to the female that is much more nondescript. And so if we just look at this example of the peacock, we can very readily see or think about how having these long feathers might be disadvantageous. If you're thinking about running from predators, having a huge long trail doesn't really help you. And so it seems like this is counterintuitive if we think about natural selection. Natural selection should select for tail feathers that are short so that you can escape from predation quite readily. Also, these are expensive to maintain. So metabolically, if we think about the resources required, you could be putting those resources elsewhere, like growth or maintenance. So again, counterintuitive to natural selection. It isn't until we start thinking about sexual selection that these start to make sense. Oftentimes we see these sexual dimorphic traits, and often it leads to differing ecological roles, like these specialized feeding. It could be due to differing reproductive needs, like with the weevil, or in the case of the peacock, it might be due to differing mating success. So longer tail feathers males get to mate more often than those without these very long tail feathers. So when we think about sexual selection, we're going to set it up the same way as natural selection. So we have to have heritable variation in a trait, and it has to affect its ability, its fitness, and in this case, the fitness is due to the ability to obtain mates. If this is true, then the variants that are conducive to success should become more common over time. So just like with natural selection, those that are more fit, those traits that make you more fit, in this case, better able to obtain mates, should increase in the population. And so the first thing that I want to think about is asymmetric sexual reproduction. And this really starts the theory for much of what we're going to talk about. And so let's look at an example of asymmetric sexual reproduction here in the orangutan. And I'm not getting any volume. How about you guys? Oh, that's because it's off. Mm-hmm.
There was nothing like a human on Earth. There was not even a pre-human standing upright.
So I'm just going to kind of fast forward a little bit here.
I was crossing the river at dawn. It was just getting light, and I was jumping from stone to stone to try not to get my boots wet as I crossed this broad stream. And in the middle, I paused and I looked down the stream just to kind of, look up and down the stream just to check out the view. And when I looked downstream, just about 20 meters away from me, maybe 30 meters away from me at the most, there was a big male orangutan. And he hadn't seen me because he was doing the same thing as me. He was going the other direction, trying to cross the river without getting his feet wet. I just was so struck by the fact that what he was doing was so similar to what I was just doing. And I just felt like, two apes sort of passing the morning dawn there.
So there's the big male.
So much of a characteristic of humans and seen in the great apes.
A couple more orangutans. I thought that was the baby. Let's see if we can get a baby shot.
I've always been fascinated to understand, why we're human, what makes us human. We had so many kinds of humans in the past, different kinds of bipedal apes, Australopithecines, and we had some that went extinct and some that didn't and involved new humans. So, why is that? Why did some population of Australopithecines eventually evolve into the Homo?
So that video is actually 17 minutes, so I'm not going to go through it all, but if you're interested in orangutans, it's a pretty nice just visual of the species. But in this case, this is a really strong example of asymmetric sexual reproduction. The male invests maybe 15 minutes in copulation and his semen package or ejaculate and then leaves. And that's it. That's all the investment that the male has in the reproductive success, in the bringing up of that offspring. The female, however, carries the fetus to term for 8 months, nurses it for 3 years, and then continues to raise it after nursing for up to 8 years. Yeah, so that's pretty asymmetric. If you think about all the energy required to bring up the offspring until they're independent, that's a ton of time. Yeah, Jalen, are you stretching? Or
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. We often see in comparison of male and female organisms that the females tend to invest more often and greater than the male investment. We generally see that there are larger metabolic demands of egg production compared to sperm ejaculate. So even in cases where there's not parental care, like in the orangutan, just simply the production of eggs requires more energy, more resources. You can think about this in your chicken egg, right? Like that contains a lot of nutritional value, and we eat it because of that. It's huge, a huge amount of investment. The investment just increases if we include parental care. So that's time that you're searching for your offspring, that you're not searching for yourself usually. You're sharing whatever resources you have, so you can't keep them all to yourself. In general, all of this is to increase the fitness of the offspring. However, oftentimes it actually decreases the fitness of a parent. I think in humans, I once heard that every child that a mother has is like 10 years off of her life. So that's a huge investment if you think about it. Okay. And this figure that I'm showing you here, we have on the x-axis log of body mass, and on the y-axis we have the daily gamete production rate. Okay, and so we're looking at sperm in the dashed line versus egg production in the solid line for females and males for a range of taxa. So we have mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, and invertebrates. So we're just talking about those gametes and how much energy goes into the gametes. And across the board, we see that females invest much more, even when we standardize for body size. Much more goes into the production of eggs than into sperm. In general, the egg production is 3 times the basal metabolic rate of females. And for males, it's 1,000th of the basal metabolism to produce sperm. If you include the ejaculate and everything that comes with it, maybe 4 out of 1,000. Okay. So we're talking a huge difference in investment just with those gametes, just with the egg compared to the sperm. So this sets up a whole set of theoretical predictions in which female fitness tends to be limited by resources, while male fitness tends to be limited by mates. So that the parent with the lowest investment tends to be limited by mating. So how many times can you mate? Whereas those that invest a lot more into each offspring tend to be a little more choosy who they're mating with. So I'm going to go through 3 different examples here of asymmetric reproductive success to show you that that we can generalize that across taxa. So the first one is looking at a hermaphroditic bladder snail. Okay, I'm sorry to get out of that really nice wake up music this morning, but so the first example is this hermaphroditic bladder snail that we just saw a clip of. And for this bladder snail, it is hermaphroditic, so it can reproduce via sperm or via egg. And this study used the same snails, but they saw that there was no correlation, like there wasn't a trade-off between the amount of sperm that you produced or the number of eggs that you produced. So there's not that trade-off here, but what we're really looking at is the correlation, the relationship between your number of mates and your reproductive success, your fitness. So in this case, for the snails, which is this top two panels, we have the male mating success on the x-axis for the first, the female mating success on the second x-axis, and then on the y, reproductive success of the male on the left and the female on the right. And what we see is that as the number of mating increases for the males, you'll get a strong correlation with reproductive success, so that as you continue to increase the number of mates, the more likely you are your fitness increases. And this was a significantly positive relationship. On the female side, the first mating success is almost equal to the third mating event. So it makes no difference if you mate more than once. You still have the same fitness as if you only had mated the one time compared to the third time. So in this case, this does indicate that the male function is selected for more matings compared to the female function. In this second example, we're looking at rough-skinned newts. This is actually them copulating at the moment. There's a female in the middle of this group of males, and they're all trying to mate with her. You can't see her, but she's there. Does anyone own a newt? No. Pretty cute. So in this example of the rough-skinned newts, we see something very similar. Again, on the x-axis, no, I don't want you to play anymore. Stop playing. It's still playing, okay. Sorry about that. Okay. In this middle panel with the rough-skinned newts, on the x-axis, we have the number of mates for the male on the left and the female on the right, and then the number of offspring produced on the y-axis with the males on the left and the female on the right. And we again look for the relationship between number of matings and the number of offspring, so fitness. And in this case, for the male in this study, the more matings you have, the greater the number of overall offspring that you produce. And this was highly significantly positive. And the females, while there was a trend for a slight increase, this relationship was not different from 0. So again, we're seeing that for the male function, it is selected to have more mates compared to females. In this last example, we're looking at pipefish. And pipefish, if you know of seahorses, you know, they're related there, so you can kind of think about that. So we're looking at, you know, another type of organism here. And in this case, there's even something else going on. The parental care is actually in the males in this species. So the female produces eggs and then transfers it to the male's pouch, and the male continues to care for the eggs until they hatch. So in this case, what we're seeing is that, again, we have the number of mates on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, we have the number of offspring produced. That while there is a positive relationship for the males, it's even stronger for the females in this case. So again, we see this, the number of mates for the females, right? In this case, she has the lower investment. So the lower investment, we're not really talking about male and female. We're really talking about who's investing more in the offspring. And it doesn't really have to do with an innate difference between males and females. It has to do with their resources put into this. And so for sexual selection, we tend to see that no matter what the sex, the larger your investment in the offspring, and so you're more limited by your resources and time, you should be choosy. So that's not the number of mates, it's selecting the right mate. For the lower investment in the offspring, you're more limited by mates. So the more often you mate, the better. And in this case, there probably should be competition for mates, because that's what's limiting in this case, is your access to those mates. So we're going to look at that. This is not playing well today with Zoom. Okay, we'll go here and then we'll put that. Okay. So we're going to look at competition. And competition between the same sex. So this is called intrasexual selection. So within a particular sex. So this would be competition between males, for example, or competition between females. So that is intrasexual. And for this, we're going to use the example of the marine iguana. We'll take a look at that. This is aggressive behavior, the head bobbing. And then you can kind of see them in battle here. Okay, so that was an example of direct competition between two males. And for this species, that competition is for your space. So they have their own territory. They patrol it and keep they attack incomers. And the major reason for this is that females tend to prefer certain locations. They're basking there, they're eating there, and so males will fight for territory in which females tend to be, and so they're increasing their access to those mates. And so in this example, let's show that natural selection is actually in opposition to sexual selection here. So in this panel, we're looking at the size of the iguana with the number of individuals at that particular size in two different sites in Santa Fe and Genovesa for males and for females. So in the Santa Fe site, we see quite a range of male sizes. However, large males will lose weight over time. They're not able to maintain that weight. In good years, this little star indicates the weight at which a male can maintain its own weight. Look at this huge amount, this huge frequency to the right. All of these males lose weight. They're not able to maintain it. For the males in Genovesa, it's the same situation where there's many males that are larger than what natural selection indicates they should be. All of these males lose weight. They're not able to maintain it. If you look at the females, their distribution is lower than their optimum, than the weight at which they're able to maximally maintain it. So they're below that maximum. Everybody here, all of these females are able to maintain their weight across the season. So why are these males bigger than what they're able to maintain? We look at survival. Survival tells us the same story. And the Santa Fe site, the percent survival at 100% is maintained, but you'll see that at some point, survival drastically drops for these large size class males. If we look at the other site, Genovesa, we see the same thing, that up to a certain amount, certain size class, you have 50% survival here. But up to this point, or after this point, you have a huge drop in survival. Again, natural selection indicates that having these large sizes is detrimental. So, why do we have these males way out here past the optimum size range, according to natural selection? So natural selection is acting to limit body size, but we still see these huge iguanas. So let's go down here to this next set of panels. Here we see the territories, all of the different iguanas in this study. So they were watched over the season. And then these territories were correlated with the number of copulations. And here, this is arranged by number of copulations on the x-axis, and then on the y is the number of males in that category. We see that most males have 0 copulations. This 0 bar here, 8 of them have not a single copulation event. But then way out here, this this male right here, one individual copulates 45 times. And then this individual here copulates 10 times. And if we look at where their territories are, go back over here, we see that territory 59 belongs to the individual that copulates 45 times, and individual that copulates 10 times is here in territory 65. These two territories are preferred by females for basking and eating. And so the frequency of just having access to a female is quite high in these areas. So by fighting for your territory, you could potentially have great access to mates. And by fighting for better territory, you increase that access. So most males have very few copulations, and a few males have a disproportionate number of copulations. So let's then take this data that we have about the number of copulations in a given territory and see if those males which are larger get to copulate more. And so here we have those two sites again, Santa Fe and Genovesa. And we look at the number of males that copulated in blue versus all the males that tried to in gold. And we see, and on the y-axis is the average size. And at both sites, the males that copulated on average had greater body size compared to those, all the males that tried to copulate at both sites. So yes, larger males do copulate more. So it looks like sexual selection is acting to push males to a larger size than natural selection would suggest is optimal. There are ways around this. We have some sneaky males in this case. And sneaky males are the tiny males that come through, very quickly mate, and then move on. They don't hold their territory. So they don't hold territories, they don't fight. And while, So in these two figures, we see that the frequency of non-territorial males on the y-axis here, the duration of copulation on the x for the small non-territorials, and here for the large territorial males. The experiment showed that you really needed a minimum of 3 minutes in order to have an ejaculation. So if you were interrupted prior to 3 minutes, then there was no delivery of sperm. And in this case, the frequency of undisrupted hits the 3-minute mark for those small territorial males. Most of the large territorial males are above that 3-minute mark. However, there is these males here that copulated less than the 3-minute mark. And what's happening is that the male iguanas pre-ejaculate and then they save it. They save it in a pouch. And so when they then sneak onto a male's territory, they come upon a female, they deliver their package before the 3-minute mark, and then they're out of there. Even if they're disrupted, they've had time to drop off their sperm. And apparently this is successful in 5% of the matings. So while this is a small proportion of the overall number of matings that occur, it's still a strategy that's successful for these males. They're too small to hold territory, but they're still able to add their genes to that next generation. So in this example, we see that intersexual selection can result in combat among the different organisms, among the males rather, and that this competition is really all about trying to monopolize access to mates. In this example, we showed that there was variation in competitive abilities. This is heritable, and that there's differential mating success based on your overall competitive ability. So this is direct competition, but there's 2 other ways to for intersexual selection to play out. And one of those is through sperm competition, and another is through infanticide. In sperm competition, this is a meta-analysis that I'm showing you here. And this is just a different year and looking at that data, and another year and looking at that data. What they show is that when there is direct competition, that most organisms increase their ejaculate size. Whereas there's very few, there's just one instance really where they were shown to decrease the ejaculate size. So overall, across many different organisms, one way to compete is not butting heads, but just to have more sperm on the scene. And so larger ejaculates is a common way to do that. Another is that you could guard your mates so that others don't come in and deliver sperm. You could also prolong copulation, so they're unavailable to receive other sperm. You might deposit copulatory plugs. So inserting something that prevents additional sperm from getting down to the eggs. You might, once copulation has been completed, you might put some anti-attraction pheromone on the female so that she's less likely to be attractive. Or you could have a penis scoop, and that's the image I have here of damselflies. So we have the male and the female, they're mating. And if we take a closer look at the male, the penis has this little spoon-like shape. And so what this does is it comes in and it scoops out any previous sperm and then puts its own sperm in. So in that way, you're taking out any potential competitor sperm when you copulate. The other that I mentioned was infanticide. So the sperm has been, this is after copulation, this is after zygotes have been formed, after birth. There's still a possibility of reducing someone else's fitness by coming in and going through infanticide. So one of the examples here is with lions. And in this study, what they show is that male lions will kill any cubs that are still nursing. And male lions usually come in with, not by themselves, but with like a brother or a father or uncle. And they'll come into a pride, and they usually come in with more than just one because they have to fight everyone who's already there. They have to fight the males and the females because usually if a new male moves in, all of the cubs are killed. So the females are not really on board with that either. So there's a lot of fighting that happens in order for a new lion to come in. And so in this study, they looked at the percent of cubs which died before rival male, when the male arrives, and then after the rival male. And the months before the arrival of the male, there's fairly low death. When the male arrives, there's a huge percentage right after the male arrives. But it doesn't really drop off. Even after 5 months, there's high mortality of cubs. So during this whole time, right, the females are trying to protect their cubs. The males are attempting to kill them. And the major reason in male lions for why males are killing off the cubs is that if a female's cub is killed, she comes into estrus, she becomes receptive much quicker than if that didn't happen. And given that a new male moves in every couple of years, it's pretty important to get that process started for your own offspring as soon as you can. So this has led to infanticide in lion prides. There are some other suggestions as to why this takes place besides increasing or decreasing the time to estrus. One is that it could actually provide resources so you can feed on the offspring, recovering resources that way. It could also provide a way to select for particular offspring. So you have a lot of offspring and only a few of them, you eat most of them and leave a few behind, those that are just that you think are the best. There's some suggestion that infanticide in humans also occurs. In the literature, there was a study done on foster parents and step parents versus birth parents. And there is a correlation there. But again, you have to, with human behavior, you always have to have a caveat that this, it's not necessarily due to evolution, right? We'd have to show a lot of stuff to show that, but there's some indication that this might play a role. I'm going to leave it there. We'll pick up with intersexual selection example next time. Do we have any class business before you guys go?